Thank you, sir. Several questions. First, on the origin question. We still don't know where Ebola comes from. But about 40 years ago, we saw the first outbreak in what was Zaire then, now Congo. We've looked, we've searched, we've looked at all kinds of animals. The only animal that's able to sustain the virus without it being killed are fruit bats. Fruit bats. So right now, what we're saying is it's very, very likely that fruit bats are the ones that are transmitting this virus. So having said that, these viruses are so, they don't want to die themselves. They want to survive and propagate, yeah? So historically, if you have a viral infection and the virus kills the host, that means it hasn't adjusted it properly yet. So we see that it's only bats that carry this virus that doesn't bother them at all. But if the bats eaten by an animal, or they die and an animal picks it up, the animals get sick. So if you go out in the forest and you see a dead, duiker or dead deer and stuff, people just jump all over it and they eat it, you get infected that way. That's the primary zoonotic infection when it comes from animals to humans. But what really drives it now is that when this person becomes sick, they're able to transmit it from one person to the other through their body fluids, through vomitus, through urine, through feces. And when the person dies, usually the virus has completely overwhelmed them. When they die, the person's body is full of this virus. So if people go and touch it and they have funeral rites, burial rites, and create a much more intense contact with this person, you're able to transmit it to humans that way. So two major ways: body fluids of a sick person and the coughs of somebody who's been infected. But what's happening now is when this occurs and this person shows up in hospital, you set up a major transmission within the hospital. You infect the doctors, the nurses, and all those people. And they go home, they infect people at home. And then the cycle just goes on. So now you don't even have to think about the bats or the animal transmission. It's the person-to-person transmission that's going on. That's what's made this so scary. And our biggest challenge is, how do you interrupt that? How do you stop it? And the really important thing to realize is this virus doesn't survive in nature. So if you're able to stop it for 21 days, if you're able to stop it in any community for 21 days and don't reintroduce it, you're able to control the epidemic that way. So bad as it is, that's why we say there's some urgency to do something now. Everywhere you see a case, let's go in and focus on that area and cordon it off and interrupt transmission there, because if you interrupt transmission over a 21-day period, that community is safe as long as you don't introduce another one in there. So that's the origin and transmission side. You asked about why are doctors getting infected. As I said, when somebody goes to the hospital and they're really sick, they're full of this virus. And if they vomit and they throw up and they have stool and you touch the blood, you will get infected that way. And so if somebody comes in and says, I've got fever, I've got diarrhea, and you don't really know what you're dealing with, and you take their temperature, you take you interact with them intimately, the potential for transmission there is extremely high. So that what they're doing now is helping people to have these protective care, so that every suspect that comes their way, they protect themselves as they care for this individual patient. The problem that occurred in Kenema Hospital was that you had an overwhelming number of patients coming in, and the nurses were exhausted. Normally, to run this kind of facility where you have 3 wards and an annex, you needed about 60 nurses running 8-hour shifts, 3 shifts. In this situation, there are about 10 nurses. The 10 nurses were working long hours, really long hours. And in the process, you wear this spacesuit and you in the heat, it's over 100 degrees in some cases, you're sweating, you're taking care of patients, the potential for mistakes are extremely high. If you also look at the actual suit itself, I think one will show up, that's Dr. Khan there, but there's another image later on that will come, and I'll ask a colleague to freeze it for you. So you see what we're talking about. It's really important that you have the right equipment. The right equipment is critical. So they say forget PPEs, forget personal protective equipment. All personal protective equipment not the same. There's another one coming where you have to be very, very careful and make sure you have the right one. So I think in this case, MSF had an audit of what had happened. If you could just freeze, maybe the next image, if you could just freeze that, could you go back one, please? If you look at this picture, right here, he's wearing a face shield, but all of this is exposed. If you go to the next slide, next one, please. Before traveling to Sierra Leone, I had to be fit tested because everybody's face is not the same. Traditionally, we've been working with Lassa fever in Sierra Leone, and sad to say, the day I walked into the ward there, about 4 of our nurses, the most senior, the most sophisticated, the most experienced nurses, died that day because they were familiar with working with Lassa fever. That's very, very forgiving. Ebola is not forgiving. When I wore the regular N95, I failed all of the indices. It shows that the air was leaking in, that things were seeping in. And you have this 15-minute test where you wear the mask, you shake your head, you talk, you go up and down, you move back. It's a fit test that's required. And so we have to warn everybody that's running out to go out and help. Be careful, make sure that you're really prepared before you go into that space. So the equipment is important. And one other major thing that's really important is they were overwhelmed. There's so much going on that basic protocols were not adhered to, because what happens is when you have one person die, when you have an incident like that, you stop everything. You stop everything and try to find out what happened. What happened so that you could have corrective measures. Is the protocol right? Is the guidelines correct? Are people dressed properly? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Do they have a checklist that they go through before they go into that space? Everybody, if you're doing this every day and you're in an emergency, at times you slip. But you have to find a way where you have a manager who sits there and just say, are you ready to go in there? And you can only be there for 1 hour, you come out and make sure that you're okay, But I think people were just so overwhelmed that all of those are not in place. What they're trying to do now is to completely shut down this facility, move to another location, and make sure that all of these systems are in place to ensure that the staff are safe as they carry out their functions. There was a question about staff, how do you recruit staff? I think it's a very, very complex issue. I think we really look forward to the government to help as much as possible. But these people that you need here, and with the nurses and the doctors and the clinicians, and by the way, it's not just the doctors and the nurses. When I was there, the week I was there, a driver died, an ambulance driver died, 2 of the porters died, a security guard died. So everybody that's involved in this is really, really important. We have to look at all of their needs. So in order to get the real people to go out there and help, WHO is putting out a worldwide appeal. I think they put out a $100 million request that all countries are donating to. They're putting out a worldwide request for subject matter experts. So I will find the information and make it available to the ambassador. I mean, if you have Sierra Leonean committees, whilst I was there was a guy from New Jersey who came out to volunteer for about 3 weeks out there. And there was another guy from Japan who came in. I think if we've got competent, trained people who want to volunteer, the WHO mechanism is one thing to consider, because it's a very significant effort to look at logistics and reimbursements and travel and safety in bringing everybody back. It's not the kind of thing that you just turn up the switch and it happens. You know, I think WHO is in a really good place to help support that. One of the things that we're struggling with in the hospital there now, because of all of these deaths, and these deaths were not junior staff. These were really senior people that you were looking up to. Morale is extremely low. And it's not even a money issue now. You know, you can't go pay somebody to go out there when they know the chances of their coming out alive is very, very slim. So we have to completely rebuild confidence, rebuild morale. Let them know that they will be protected when they go into that space. Let them know that their patients will actually come out of there alive. And actually, that's why the EOC is putting out these bulletins now that shows the number of survivors first, before you talk about the number of people who died. Because people are coming out of there in very, very good shape. But let's make sure that we can reinforce that and strengthen the resolve of the staff. So right now, when we were there, when MSF showed up, there was a big round of applause, you know, for MSF. I think with MSF and their partners, if they come in, they're able to rebuild the morale of the local staff. I mean, people will be encouraged to come back in. You have to find ways to compensate the nurses. Quite frankly, honestly, if we put all of our effort in this, we could shut this thing down in about 2 to 3 months. If we go lukewarm in this, it'll drag out. So I think we should not be afraid to compensate people, to give them bonuses, whatever, because if we do it all now, you know, it'll just be for a short time and will interrupt transmission. So, and the equipment side, as I mentioned, that was a very good example. I think, you know, let's try to get as much equipment out there as possible, but let's work with people who know what they're dealing with, you know, because it's not your normal surgical gown that you send out there. It's not your normal hood that you send out there. I think most of the basic PPEs, the Tyveks are standard, but you know, you have to find a way to cover the whole exposed space. In fact, what we use at CDC, you cover the whole space, but you also pump air. You have a little battery pack in your back where you pump air in there that keeps you cool so you can work for an extended period of time. But if you just give the regular mask there that people are not fit tested, you know, you're causing problems. And even the masks that are being sent in country, even the PPEs that are sent in country, we really have to find a way to manage that process well and prioritize who gets things first. I think the nurses and people who are working in the high-risk zones really need to get those first. We're driving up and all of those checkpoints, people had their masks and whatever. You know, I think for every one patient that you see in that environment, you have to look at thousands and thousands of people who come through. And in a lot of cases, they don't need a full body outfit. But for those who are in the hospital, every one of them, the ambulance driver, the security guard, the nurses, the doctors, they need to be fully protected.